So we're starting a brand new series on the book of Job. Look at your neighbor and say, Job. Job is the man. Job is the best of the best. And I want to kind of set the stage here for where we're going to go the next probably 5 or 6 weeks. We're going to be in Job 28 a little bit later, but it's going to take us a while to get there. So you got all kinds of time to turn there. So I just want to kind of give you an overview today, and I want to kind of set the tone for where we're going to go in the next number of weeks. So Job is part of what's called the wisdom literature of the Bible. So if you've ever read the book of Proverbs, how many of you have read some of the Proverbs before? Yeah, the Proverbs are really, really good. Proverbs are part of that. How many of you have read Ecclesiastes? Okay, how many of you came away depressed after you read Ecclesiastes, right? Ecclesiastes, listen, it's a crazy book. It's so beautiful and weird all at the same time. That's also part of the wisdom literature. And then we have Job. So what we have in the book of Job is this man of righteousness, this man who walked with God, his family walked with God, and all sorts of crazy, terrible things happened to our friend Job. And we're going to talk about over the next number of weeks how Job is part of this wisdom literature in the Bible, that the book of Job is designed to help you and I navigate the trials of life, to navigate the unexpected in life, which happens to all of us. Now, when I say wisdom, what kind of things come to your mind? Chances are, for most of us, when we think about the wisdom of the Bible, or maybe just wisdom in general, we usually think about some sort of vague philosophical concepts that nobody really understands. You think about Gandalf or Dumbledore telling mysteries that nobody really knows what they're saying. You think about some sort of vague, intangible thing that doesn't really apply a whole lot to real life. Like, what is wisdom? How do you get wisdom? What do you do with wisdom? Is wisdom practical at all? And there's a verse here in Exodus that I want to read to you real quick. Exodus 31:3. This is a man who was building the tabernacle of Moses. It says, I filled him with God's Spirit, with wisdom, understanding, and ability in every craft, to design artistic works in gold, silver, and bronze. Now here's what I like about this. God says he gave this guy wisdom to build stuff. How many of you out there are builders? You're in construction. A few of you guys? Okay, I am the furthest thing from a builder you've ever seen. And my wife's family are basically builders for a living, okay? All of the men in Kelly's family have built houses for their wives. Actually, when they proposed, they were like, now come live in this beautiful house that I just built for you. And when I proposed to Kelly, I was like, hey, look at this bookshelf I got from Target, and I built it myself, okay? I don't want to brag. The instructions said it took 60 minutes. I did it in 57, so that's pretty much impressive. When we were remodeling Kelly's office, Kelly's a chiropractor, I remember we show up to remodel. All the guys in Kelly's family, they show up in their trucks, right? They're pulling out power tools. They have boxes of tools that take up whole garages. I show up with every tool that I've ever owned in my life in a Walmart bag. True story, true story. There was a tape measure that didn't really retract the way it was supposed to. I had a drill that I think was literally from the dollar store. And I think I had a hammer from a McDonald's Happy Meal when I was like 7 years old. And I realized real quick that like, okay, I better learn some stuff. And I did. I learned just enough to be dangerous, I like to say. But I've picked some stuff up over the years. But the reason that I tell you that here, the reason that I read this verse from Exodus is that the author here of Exodus says that wisdom is like a craftsman. Wisdom is being able to build and construct. Being somebody who has wisdom is about this skilled trade. That like this man who was filled with wisdom so that he could design artistically, so that he could create and build the temple of God, that's what wisdom is like. Wisdom is not this abstract concept. The wisdom of God is concrete action for real life so that you and I can have the skills to be the people that God has called us to be. The same way that when you look at a musician or an athlete, you watch these people who you know they have some raw talent, but you know they invested like years of their lives developing and honing these skills. And you watch them and it's amazing to see. And the Bible says that that's what God's wisdom is like. That God's wisdom is not just for a few older people to ponder mysteries that the rest of us are just in the dark about. Rather, wisdom is like a skill, and it's the skill of life. Now, who wants to be good at life? Anybody out there? Okay, the rest of you, I'm not sure what's going on. Maybe some deep-seated issues there. We'll pray for you. I don't know about you, but I want to be good at life. I want to know how to navigate life. And the wisdom literature is about the concrete skills to navigate life in this world. That like a skilled craftsman or artist or musician or athlete, you and I have the capacity, the knowledge, the ability to make godly decisions in every step of life. That's what wisdom is. Now, when you come to the wisdom literature of the Bible, when you read the book of Proverbs, for example, and many of you know some of the Proverbs are very cause and effect. It's sowing and reaping. Proverbs is very blunt. Proverbs is very direct. It's like, hey, if you're stupid, you're going to destruction. It says that. If you're wise, you'll have life. That's how Proverbs works. And so when you read through the wisdom of the Bible, like Proverbs, it talks about money. How do you make good financial decisions? It talks about marriage and family. It talks about working hard at your job and being a person of integrity and diligence. The wisdom of God covers all these things in life, that we can live God's way in God's world. Now, when you see these things in Proverbs, I want you to understand that Proverbs is like one side of the wisdom coin. That if you, in general, make wise decisions, life will tend to go better for you, in general. So, for example, if you apply the wisdom of Proverbs to make good financial decisions, in general, you'd probably have more money than someone who made bad financial decisions. Does that make sense? Let's say you take the wisdom of Proverbs and you apply it to relationships and family. Chances are you'd have better relationships than if you didn't. Now, here's why I say Proverbs is one side of the coin. Because on the other side, you look at Job. And what Job presents to us is somebody who does all the right things and life goes terrible. And you see, if you don't have a theology of Job, you'll begin to treat God as if he's someone who owes you something because you're trying to do all the right things. And I want you to understand here that, yes, in general, those principles and Proverbs are true. But sometimes in life, you can do everything right and things still fall apart. What we see from Job is a guy who was righteous. We see in the beginning of the story, we'll talk more next week, he had a successful business. He had a successful family. He loved the Lord. He was a righteous man, and things fell apart. Some of you have been through things in your life that no person should ever have to go through. You've been through horrific loss, pain. You get a bad diagnosis from the doctor out of the blue one day. You show up to find that you lost your job. Maybe you lost a business. Maybe you've lost a house. Been through abuse of every kind. Things happen as part of life in this world. And the reason I want to set the stage here today is because I need you to understand something about the book of Job. And it's this: the book of Job does not give us answers, but it does give us wisdom. Now, if you're like me, you're like, forget wisdom, I want answers, right? And if you come to the book of Job looking for answers for why stuff happened to you, you're going to be really disappointed. So let's just come to terms with that right now. Can we all agree on that? If we're going to come to the book of Job and say, God, why does this happen? Job is 42 chapters. Not a single verse does God say, Job, here's why I let that happen. Seriously? You had 42 chapters. You couldn't give me half a verse? At no point do we get answers to the pain and the suffering of life, but we do get wisdom. And here's why that's important. Let's say, for analogy here, that you are the captain of a ship. And all of a sudden, as you're steering your ship, a storm comes. In that moment, would you rather have somebody explain how to become a meteorologist and how all the weather works and the science of why storms come? Or would you rather have somebody who knows how to sail the boat in the storm? And that's what the book of Job is like. The book of Job is not, here's all the theology of where storms come from. What the book of Job does is it tells you right in the middle of your storm, here's how you can navigate this with the wisdom of God. So that no matter what happens in your life, no matter if you're like Job at the beginning of the story when everything's going well, or you're like Job in the middle of the story when everything's falling apart, then no matter what happens to you in your life, good or bad, prosperity or calamity, sickness or health, money or poverty, then no matter what happens, you can navigate it with the life of God. Navigate it with the wisdom of God. That's what Job offers us. What you need in your life is not answers, because you could have all the answers and it wouldn't change the moment that you're in. You could have every answer under the sun and it wouldn't change the storm that you're in. And so what you need is wisdom. What you need is wisdom so that suffering, like Ryan read in our scripture verse, like gold in the fire, suffering refines you instead of destroying you. You see, what I want as your pastor is for you to be able to navigate life to where suffering doesn't cause a shipwreck in your faith, to where disappointment doesn't cause a shipwreck, so that sickness or business troubles or family troubles don't cause the end of your faith, but like gold in the fire, you can come out of that thing better than when you went into it. That like gold in the fire, what happens in the fire is only burning away stuff that you didn't need anyway. Only burning away immaturity that you were trying to get rid of anyway. Burning away sin that you were trying to get rid of anyway. That's what wisdom does for you. It teaches us to navigate the storms of life. Now, I want to read to you here from Job 28. It's one of my favorite passages in the whole book of Job. We're going to read most of it here. The heading in the CSB, which I'm reading from here, says it's called A Hymn to Wisdom. And here's what Job says. Job says, "Surely there's a mine for silver and a place where gold is refined. Iron is taken from the ground and copper is smelted from ore. A miner puts an end to the darkness. He probes the deepest recesses for ore in the gloomy darkness." Skipping down to verse 12. He says, "But where can wisdom be found? And where is understanding located? No one can know its value, since it cannot be found in the land of the living. The ocean depths say, 'Wisdom's not in me,' while the sea declares, 'I don't have it.' Gold cannot be exchanged for it, and silver cannot be weighed out for its price. Wisdom cannot be valued in the gold of Ophir, in the precious onyx or lapis lazuli. Gold and glass do not compare with it, and articles of fine gold cannot be exchanged for it. Coral and quartz, not worth mentioning. The price of wisdom is beyond pearls. Topaz from Cush cannot compare with it, and it cannot be valued in pure gold." So again, here we go, verse 20. "Where then does this wisdom come from? And where is understanding located? It is hidden from the eyes of every living thing and concealed from the birds of the sky. Abaddon and death say, 'We have heard news of it with our ears.' But God understands the way to wisdom, and he knows its location. For he looks to the end of the earth, and he sees everything under the heavens. When God fixed the way to the wind and distributed the waters by measure, when he established a limit for the rain and a path for the lightning, he considered wisdom and evaluated it. He established it and examined it." I want you to see this here, final verse. "He said to mankind, 'The fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to turn from evil, is understanding. So here's how beautiful is that? He gives this whole poetic image about miners. They know where the gold is. They're searching, they're seeking for the gold. They dig into it. They dig deep into the earth so they can find that gold. And Job here is saying this is a picture of our lives, that we're pursuing so many things. That like miners looking for gold, we're looking for the best way to live life. We're looking for the things that we think will bring us joy, bring us contentment and peace and happiness. And here, Job says that more than you're searching for all those other things, search for wisdom, that it's better than gold, it's better than diamonds, that more than anything else that you're looking for in your life, you need wisdom. Proverbs 4:7 says this, wisdom is supreme, so get wisdom. And whatever else you get understanding. I love that. Whatever else you get, I don't know about you, but I'm trying to get a lot of things. I'm trying to get through this day. That's one thing. Can we start there? I'm trying to get through this week. I'm trying to be a person who's good at my job and a good husband for my family and a good father, and I'm trying to do all these different things. And Kelly and I, we have these goals as a family. I have personal goals and all these things that we're trying to get. And what the wisdom literature teaches us is, in the midst of trying to get everything else, get wisdom, because if you don't get wisdom, you won't know how to steward all those other things in your life. And it's more valuable than anything else out there. And not only does this passage teach us the value of wisdom, but it tells us where to get it. Where is wisdom found? It's not found in the depths of the earth. The sea doesn't know where it is. Even in the land of the dead, they've only heard of it. But where is wisdom? Wisdom is the Lord's. Wisdom is found in the fear of the Lord. Now, this word fear, it's not talking about being terrified of God because he's out to get you. It's not about being scared of God. It's about this holy awe that comes from being in the presence of God. I don't know if you've ever been around someone. Maybe it was your spouse before when you first started dating them. Remember, you show up on that first date and you're like terrified, right? You're like in awe of this person and you're like, man, they want to be with me. There's a sense of like a wonder that's there. Maybe you've ever met one of your heroes, somebody that you've looked up to for a long time. There's a sense of like, man, I'm meeting with this person. And how much more then for the God who made heaven and earth should you and I have this fear of the Lord, this awe that says he's made everything that exists. The creator of all things that have ever been and will ever be is this person, and he invites us into fellowship and communion with him. And if Job does one thing, it imparts this reverence and awe for the person of God. I won't spoil what happens a little bit later in the story, but Job has this crazy encounter with God where God shows up and he speaks to Job and kind of puts him in his place, to be honest. And what we need in our lives, if we're going to grow in wisdom, is this vision of God, to see him rightly, like we sang about earlier. That for some of us, our God is so small, our God is so powerless, our God is so distant, he's uncaring, he's checked out. And I want you to know in this series the beauty of God, the glory of God, the sovereignty of God. What do I mean when I say these terms? I mean that God is so far above everything else in this world that he's in a category all by himself. There's no one to compare to him. There's no one like him. He's in a league all of his own. And when I talk about the sovereignty of God, if I say a nation is sovereign, what do I mean? If a nation is sovereign, it means that that nation exists without anybody else's approval or permission. It doesn't need anybody else's vote. It doesn't need anyone to agree with it or support it. If a nation is sovereign, it can lead and govern itself because it has its own right to exist. I want you to know, God is sovereign over all things in heaven and earth. And because he is God, he reigns over all things. And it's his right, it's his prerogative as God to rule and reign as he sees fit And he didn't really ask my opinion about it. And I really wish he would sometimes. And you see, if you're going to grow in wisdom, grow in your walk with God, navigate the storms of life, you've got to get to a place where you acknowledge he's the sovereign God and you and I are not. And that's really hard to hear. Now, nobody in their theology would put themselves on the same level as God, but we do it all the time. Hey, God, I got some good ideas if you want to listen. Hey, God, I think you can maybe do this a little bit better if I'm being honest with you. Hey, God, have you noticed this thing over here? Have you noticed this stuff happening over there? And what Job comes to realize is wisdom. And it's not just, again, some obscure, abstract theology. It's a wisdom that's rooted in a sovereign God. It's wisdom that's rooted in a God who reigns from his throne, who sees what you and I don't see, who's way smarter than you and I could ever understand because he's God. You know, when you have kids, you begin to get a small glimpse of how God's ways are so much higher than ours. You know, for me and Kelly, we could give Zachariah everything in the world, and he'll scream and shout and cry just because he wants to. And it's like sometimes, even when we're doing all the stuff that's good for him, he doesn't think it's good for him. Now, if me as a parent, as a flawed human being, can understand that, right, that he can't have chocolate for breakfast, especially not in my house. I don't even like chocolate. I'm kind of weird with that. You can't have candy for breakfast. You can't stay up all night. He goes till he crashes. He goes 100 miles an hour and then hits a brick wall and he's out. He just goes full speed ahead. And you see, if you and I as parents can understand that this child won't fathom all the things that we know, how much more does God's perspective reign over our own tiny perspective? So I want to tell you a couple things here in closing about the wisdom of God. God's wisdom, as much as I hate to tell you this, God's wisdom includes suffering. But God's wisdom uses suffering. And that doesn't feel good. It doesn't sound good. And that doesn't mean that the things that happen to you are good. God didn't cause it, and we'll talk about that later in Job. But God looks out on a fallen world. He looks out on a corrupted world, a world tainted by sin and by suffering. In one sense, if God was going to get rid of all the suffering in the world, he'd have to get rid of all of us because we caused some of it. And we can talk about the origins of evil and where does it come from, and we can talk about all that. But for now, I want you to know that God looks out on this messed up world full of evil, wickedness, sin, injustice, disappointment, grief, pain. He looks out on all of it. And his plan to make you the person that he wants you to be sometimes includes being like Job. Sometimes it includes navigating the pain and the suffering of this world and coming out of it on the other side. And now maybe you would say, Joey, if that's what God's wisdom looks like, his wisdom sounds messed up. His wisdom sounds pretty foolish. Guess what? I agree with you. And you know what else? God kind of agrees with you. When you get to the New Testament, it's funny. The Bible acknowledges that the wisdom of God led to some things that looked pretty foolish. What do I mean? I mean that in Jesus Christ, the Son of God, somehow God's wisdom meant the Son of God suffering and dying on a cross. Does that sound like wisdom to anybody? You see, here's what I want you to know. If the wisdom of God sometimes looks like foolish things, that's okay, because God's wisdom is actually better than you and I realize. Here's what Corinthians says. This is the Apostle Paul. 1 Corinthians 1:18. The word of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but it is the power of God to us who are being saved. The Jews ask for signs, and the Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. A stumbling block to Jews, foolishness to Gentiles. Yet to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. Because God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. What does all that mean? It means that in the wisdom of God, Jesus Christ came and entered into the suffering of the world by taking it onto himself. And you have to understand, nobody on the first Good Friday called it good. You think Mary, the mother of Jesus, was sitting there saying, this is a Good Friday? You think the apostles who ran in fear for their lives were saying, we're going to call this Good Friday every year, I think? Absolutely not. On the cross, Jesus Christ, perfect, righteous, innocent, dies an unjust death, tortured horribly. And you have to see the scandal of the cross. Before the cross was a religious symbol, it was a political symbol. It was a symbol for all the losers whose army lost the battle, for slaves who ran away, for criminals. It was a shameful death. You look at the cross and you think, how embarrassing, how shameful, how foolish. And yet, for those of us who are being saved, that's the wisdom of God. That's the power of God. And I want to tell you today, if a foolish cross can save your soul, God can also use whatever other foolishness is happening in your life. This isn't some fringe idea. This is the heart of the gospel. That God's foolishness, which includes suffering, it looks like it's nuts. It doesn't make any sense. When you're in the middle of it, it's like, how could this be good ever? How could God ever use any of this? And again, I'm not just talking about some minor stuff. You get a flat tire, you have a bad day. I'm talking about horrific things. Pain, abuse, grief, sickness. And if you're going to ask me, Joey, why did these things happen? I don't know. I just know that the cross tells me that what looks foolish to me, it can sometimes be the wisdom of God. That what looks like weakness to me can sometimes be the power of God. And it's not that he caused it, but that he'll use it. If he can use the worst thing we humans have ever done, which is to crucify the Son of God, if he can use that, he can use whatever's happening to you and me. If he can use a cross, he can use that bad diagnosis. If he can use a cross, he can use you losing your job. He can use that pain, that disappointment. And you and I, we will find, as we navigate life in this world with the wisdom of God, you'll find as we navigate the book of Job, not answers, not a list of here's why in the mystery of God allows these things. What you'll find is wisdom that's rooted in a God who sometimes looks foolish to us, but that actually the foolishness of God is greater than all the wisdom of this world. And like Job, you will leave with a better picture of a sovereign God, a better picture of a God who sees what we don't see, and a God who takes the worst things. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean they're good things. They're still terrible things. But a God who's really good at bringing life out of those places.